Okay, let's get started, folks. I don't think this is actually going to be something that I post for wider viewing. I think it's just for my RPG fam because I really don't know if I'm very prepared to do this in an audience friendly fashion. I may run my mouth off a little bit, but maybe it'll be interesting. Uh, so I find that the future history that goes into Twilight 2000, at least this version 2.2, it feels very schmarmy, novice. I don't know how to say it. It's not that I don't think World War III is implausible. It's that the scenario given is just not very believable to me, and I find that that really hurts my enjoyment of the game because you're asked to play soldiers, and that the war is sort of winding down. All the supply chains have died out, and militaries are kind of dissolving as it stops being relevant to heed to some more distant chain of command. So the game is about people who got caught up in the war. And specifically, probably people who were in the military before the war started or were conscripted and have watched, in this timeline, 4 years of World War III go on. And there's a number of kind of elements of this that are sort of difficult for me to believe. And I'm just going to go through them. The hypothesis here is that a better or a more, like, I don't know, I don't want to say literate, but someone who has their CIA analyst card, or in my case, a degree in comparative politics, might be able to do something that could have fewer holes in it. And what would the end result of that be? It's because you're in Poland. You're a bunch of soldiers in Poland. Presumably, some of them will be United States soldiers, and that's where the game begins. Is that as the war has wound down, and you start going on adventures together, possibly to go home, probably to stop, put a finger in the eye of some nasty warlords. And that's one aspect of this book that I also kind of didn't find particularly great, which was the absence of frankness about the shitty stuff of war, frankly. Things like rape, and hunger, stealing people's property, like soldiers specifically, dispossessing people. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of that sort of nastiness here, and I don't know if that's like, it seems like the audience also, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's something that the audience really contemplated a great deal, except to say it's post-apocalyptic. Things are breaking down. And anyway, what I mean by that, and I'll probably chop this out if I ever edit it, the thing that I find missing in Twilight 2000 is a recognition of the civilian power locuses of people power, and generally the ability of and willingness of people to say no. And after all, that's exactly how the Soviet Union came apart in many cases, is in color revolutions, the Velvet Revolution in Portugal, and in the Czech Republic, and so on. There just doesn't seem to be much recognizance of the fact that, like, regardless of whether democracies will go to war, which is what this quote is about, people tend, and specifically populations, start to become very inconvenient on the path to war. And this is a very slow roll into nuclear Armageddon, to the point that there's enough advance notice that it's sort of hard to understand how there wouldn't be meaningful and very strong direct action movements that would go down, and general strikes and the like. And general strikes paralyze countries, and they cause regime changes and policy changes. And I don't think the authors really are very cognizant of that. So, and I think that being more cognizant would place more cachet in the civilians that you're trying to protect. It would perhaps create some, tension between these military people who have seen how those pesky civilians rioting, that sort of tension between direct action and warfare at the front. It would be interesting to take those opinions into the anarchy post-apocalyptic phase and kind of informed by what happened before. This is what you feel about certain types of civilian direct actors, because everybody becomes a direct actor in an anarchy. So, what fools we were to allow ourselves to be lulled into a warm sense of security by the events of the late 80s and early 90s. I don't think anyone felt secure watching that. At least I didn't. It was very uncertain. The nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union went all over the place. Went to the Ukraine, and there was the chance of rogue people going in lots of different directions. And there was huge cash injections from the United States coffers, especially, but from the world at large, giving Soviet nuclear scientists something to do, giving the Soviet military-industrial complex something to do in the form of space stuff, keeping Space Station Mir running. This is a lot of direct cash injection into the Russian economy as it was in a state of collapse. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. How childlike we were in trumpeting of the new age of peace, prosperity, and goodwill. Well, Francis Fukuyama, the whole end of history essay, a lot of people thought that, but hegemony is kind of what it was. It became the era of U.S. hegemony, and I'll have to look at the copyright date on this. And that may be the thing it's not really recognizant of, is that the 90s were dominated by the United States attempting to pursue a foreign policy that was, trying to lead the world, and also acting with the military prerogative that it now had to try and shape the coming world of the 2000s. And that's one of the things that I'm not sure I really see in this, and I'm not sure if there's a difference that I'm missing as far as the opinions of the author as to, maybe there's a divergence that I didn't see that comes in the early 90s. But suffice it to say, we will continue. How could we have believed such naive rubbish with the lesson of history so plainly before us? Democracies have always made war on each other. It has been a fact of life since the earliest democracies flourished in Greece. Okay, well, those aren't, I wouldn't really, whatever. And warred continuously upon each other. Except it wasn't continuous. They had lots of truces. The Peloponnesian War between Spartans and Athenians, of course, did go on for quite a while and was the undoing of Athens. But after a battle, you often ended up negotiating something or paying a settlement and ending the war, because your constituents, your voters, threaten regime change if you don't. That's that whole direct action thing. As in, it doesn't take an election to change presidents. And that's something which is missing from this text. How could we have forgotten that the War of 1812, two great Western democracies made enthusiastic, aggressive war on each other? Okay, it was a limited warfare, naval warfare, to begin with, and the British escalated that because the United States didn't stop and then the British also were very keen on kind of making sure that the United States didn't end up becoming part of the continental system. They wanted to make sure that Napoleon didn't, it wasn't able to use the United States as a vector of a new trading system, because that's the second part of the Napoleonic Wars, were Napoleon trying to imagine an economy without the British. And so there was limited actions by the British in general to punitive actions on the American coast, particularly burning Washington and so on. And then there was a lot of stuff in Canada and along the American Midwest. Native Americans saw an opportunity to get back territory that they'd lost, and that plays a huge part in the escalation of that war. And also there was American military adventurism wanting to take Ontario specifically, and just sort of also that was limited warfare too, frankly. It escalated to the point where the British built a first-rate man of war on Lake Erie with 100 guns, which is crazy to think about in the year 1812. Like Ohio, how many people lived in Ohio in 1812? And there's this massive battleship. But the battles, they had 100 people on a side in the American Midwest, or so. Several hundred people. Tippecanoe, of course, was, I don't know if that's actually part of the War of 1812, but suffice it to say, the biggest battle the biggest victory, Andrew Jackson's victory at the Battle of New Orleans, it takes place after terms had been reached between the United States and the United Kingdom. The treaty had been signed, and the mail just hadn't gotten to the opposite sides of the battle. Was it enthusiastic, aggressive war? I mean, it was, an escalation of, first of all, impressment of American sailors, and protecting American citizens. And that led to Americans attacking British shipping and vice versa. And so the naval conflict escalated. And there's stages to it. And then there was an incursion into America, and there was declared war. And so, various people had policy objectives, territorial expansionism, and so on. And they went about it kind of haphazardly in many places, just going in different directions. So I don't know if enthusiastic is really the right word, just as far as whatever. This is not about the War of 1812. How could we have forgotten that democracies represent the will of the people, and that the will of the people is often for war? I mean, is it? I mean, the most telling thing about this is that the memory of Vietnam, I remember as a child, was much fresher. And the enthusiasm for the Iraq War was limited. The prosecution of the 2003 Iraq War was tactically framed around limited manpower. The United States invaded Iraq with 75,000 men in uniform and tried to occupy it with a similar number to begin with, and using superior technological firepower. The initial phase was largely successful. I mean, the back was broken of Saddam's army very quickly. And, the political will of Iraq to continue fighting was, under Saddam's leadership was, not great. And so in the internal divisions, reached a false, very quickly within a month, there was a false victory from that war. And it's 17 years ago. I don't think I'm offending anyone in speaking to it in that fashion, because, there was insurgencies, plural, which cropped up over the years following. And that's, that's one of the things that I want to talk about is the internal divisions within European countries, I think, are overstated in this volume, and I may have the 90s wrong, and then the level of firepower or force capability of the small European countries seems vastly overestimated too. Anyway, this is the real part of it that I want to get into and speak to, critique. We're going to do a read along of this part. Countdown to Armageddon. What follows is an outline chronology of the events leading up to the current world situation. Obviously, we cannot deal with every event in every country in equal detail. Instead, we will have presented a rough outline of major world events and concentrated on major campaigns of the war after 1995. So, 1989, communist governments topple in pro-democracy demonstrations. In the case of Romania, armed insurrection. I mean, I don't know about that, unless this is already different. Unless you're telling me that there was a civil war or an actual physical. I mean, it's really what happened was there was a huge general strike. Hundreds of thousands of people, said no. And eventually, questions of loyalty to the regime and the level of brutality that the regime required to suppress the general strike and uprising exceeded what the military was willing to do. And so Ceausescu's elite support fell apart. There was not enough people within the echelons of the military of Romania. There were enough people sympathetic with the uprising's demands within the military that the military it couldn't comply and maintain that. Again, I don't know if this is an alternate version already. Voting with their feet, East German citizens flooded into the West. I mean, sure. I'm not gonna. East Germany kind of had its hand forced as far as opening its borders. In Poland, a number of German ethnic organizations form in response to West Germany's policy of accepting as a German citizen anyone who can prove themselves of Germanic descent. This must be new. I don't think that actually happened. It is rumored that membership in ethnic clubs will be good enough. Yeah, I feel like this is definitely new. I don't think that was a thing. The Soviet Union's new policy of encouraging political pluralism in Europe makes the end of bureaucratic communism a certainty. Mao Zedong's forgotten maxim, "Let 10,000 flowers bloom," becomes a reality as dozens of new powers spring into being. Parties. The only European communist governments which survive the revolution of 1989 are those outside the Warsaw Pact, Yugoslavia and Albania. Well, that's believable. The Berlin Wall is torn down in spots, and German reunification is now spoken of openly. The question is no longer if, but rather when. Riots in the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan over alleged repression of Armenians require intervention by Soviet troops. Well, this is fairly believable that there would be, direct action and, some sort of rising and that happened generally during the Soviet collapse. As a result, the Republic remains a powder keg for months. Okay, sure. Elsewhere, the Chinese political reform movement is brutally crushed by government military forces. An attempted coup against President Aquino of the Philippines is foiled with the help of American air cover. Well, yeah, I mean, Americans protecting dictators. That's okay. And the Republic of Panama is invaded by the U.S. to remove the government of Manuel Noriega. Okay, that's true. That happened. In a major upset, 1990, of political pundits in the United States, a coalition opposition party headed by Violeta Chamorro defeats Daniel Ortega's bid for re-election in Nicaragua. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the exact kind of situation with when the Soviet-friendly Nicaraguan government lost the electoral mandate. Spring elections in the Soviet republics of Belarusia, the Ukraine, and Russia sweep local reform candidates into office. That happened. Before, during, and after these elections, ethnic unrest continues to simmer in Azerbaijan and spreads to minority republics of Tajikistan. That happened. Georgia, yeah, that definitely happened. Kazakhstan, mostly in the form of ethnic demonstrations and occasional riots. Okay. Secessionism kind of was on the table very early, as far as I understand, especially in the Central Asian republics. I mean, they just wanted to get out of the Soviet Union, the same as all the Eastern European countries were getting to get out of the Soviet Union. Low-level armed violence spreads throughout the Muslim parts of the Caucasus and Central Asia, although most of it fails to come to the attention of the rest of the world, who are distracted by events in Germany. Okay, I mean, that's weird. Because, I mean, it seems like most people were paying very much attention to how the Soviet Union was coming apart at the seams, and perestroika definitely gave it a boost there. I guess maybe the major news networks were mesmerized by whatever this weird alternate nativist German thing going on is, although they didn't tell us what it was. What is it that's going on in Germany? I mean, I definitely remember in 1990 and 1991 that things were escalating, and I was a kid. Iraq stuns the rest of the world by invading Kuwait in August. With the Soviet Union in disarray, the world rallies behind U.S. leadership against resisting Iraqi aggression, and troops from a dozen countries, a few of them still formally members of the Warsaw Pact, pour into Saudi Arabia. Well, that happened. Yeah, I mean, this is one way of putting it. The long-awaited and long-feared in some circles reunification of Germany becomes reality in October. Okay. The four power conferences, representing the United States, United Kingdom, USSR, and France, recognize the inevitable, also guarantee Poland's territorial integrity. As part of this agreement, NATO troops will maintain a presence in the newly unified republic, the only way some European nations will agree to the deed. Yeah, so I remember, and people were anxious about a unified Germany being stronger and displacing France's minor power, the biggest minor power role. The newly united Germany renounces any territorial claims outside of its post-World War II boundaries, but asserts continued interest in the welfare of ethnic Germans living outside Germany. I don't think that I mean, that wasn't really a huge thing. I think that's made up. And I mean, it needs more development for this kind of, I don't know. Let's go on. Membership in German ethnic organizations in Western Poland grows, particularly in Silesia, where the floundering efforts of the new non-communist Polish government to convert from a controlled to a free economy result in only a partial success. Okay, I mean, that's true of most marketization. Poland attempts to negotiate a border treaty with Belarusia, but is rebuffed, and the official Belarusian statement describes the city of Białystok as occupied by Poland. Okay, I can imagine there being a new border dispute, although I think one thing to note is that settling borders was one of the things that the Warsaw Pact era, that was one of the things that the Soviets really tried to do, is solidify the mandate within the various Warsaw Pact countries and kind of get them manageable by containing the level of division within them. And so I think the borders were, in many cases, probably adjusted or found their way. There's probably a lot of relocation, voluntary and otherwise, during the Soviet era, so that people would go to the country that matched their language and ethnicity. There's probably incentives, if you take my meaning, during that era. My family is, Silesian Germans, came to America in the 1880s or so. My own family. I don't know how much German identitarianism could take root in that part of Poland, because I really don't know how many Germans there really were in that time in the year 1990. So maybe we just need to hand wave and say that there are a lot of ethnic Germans that are still speaking German in Silesia, that, didn't, for whatever reason, migrate into the GDR during the communist period, that's the part that's sort of, I don't understand, I'm a little wobbly on, because lots of people migrated immediately following World War II. Anyway, let's continue. Poland attempts to negotiate a border treaty with Belarus. Okay. By the end of the year, Soviet troop withdrawals are underway from Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. Yeah, I mean, I think that drawdown had even already happened during the Gorbachev era. In large part, they had scaled back the Russian divisions because that was part of the attempt to provide some sense of national self-determination. They didn't want another 1968 Czechoslovakia, or rather they realized that in order to provide the appearance of liberalization during perestroika, that was one of the points of contention, was that the Russians needed to not be able to effect a putsch. Like these Warsaw Pact governments, in order to be legitimate, had to, not be so easily replaced at the end of a Russian gun, just because Russia didn't like it. So whatever. I mean, but there were still, Russian forces, I'm sure, in different fashion. And they were pulling out in 1990. That makes sense. And in January, the Gulf Coalition began a stunning aerial offensive against Iraq and followed up with a blitzkrieg ground war in February, which liberated Kuwait and crushed the flower of the Iraqi army. Although Saddam remained in power, his authority was reduced to the central third of his nation, and his military was no longer capable of aggression against neighboring states. So the no-fly zones thing, I guess, happened. I think that took most of 1991, possibly into 1992, to get the whole no-fly zone thing set up. In March, both Croatia and Slovenia secede from Yugoslavia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina just follows in short order. Violence soon breaks out between the Serbian-dominated federal government and the militias of the breakaway states. Accurate. Ethnic and religious violence in the Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union escalates, and the Soviet Union increases its troop withdrawal schedule from the Warsaw Pact, I guess, in order to use forces inside its own borders. And this is the counter-historical thing. This is the counter-historical thing. Fighting is particularly heavy between Armenians and Azeris in the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. That happened. As the republic seized greater autonomy, Gorbachev continued to vacillate between an all-out drive for reform and an all-out commitment to a strong central government in the old style. I think that kind of happened. I think the Central Committee was pulling in opposite directions, or rather, Gorbachev was pulling in the liberalization direction, and the Central Committee was pulling in others. The result is an accelerating slide toward chaos. On July 1st, the old Warsaw Pact is formally abolished, the last straw for many Moscow hardliners. In August, the hardliners seized power in a bloody coup. I'm not particularly familiar with what happened in the lead up to Yeltsin becoming the president and so on, and what happened with Gorbachev. I don't remember exact timeline. I think there's differences here though. On August 19th, elements of the Taman Guards and Katamir motor rifle divisions move into the center of Moscow and seize the most important public buildings and radio stations. An 8-member emergency committee deposes Gorbachev for reasons of health and bans strikes, protests, or public assemblies. Defiant protesters gather at the Soviet Parliament building along with a few dissident military units and a cadre of armed Afghan war veterans to defend Yeltsin and Parliament. On August 20th, elements of the Katamir division, spearheaded by the elite KGB Alpha team, storm the Parliament building and scatter the protesters. Yeltsin, along with an estimated 800 others, die in the assault. So this is the divergence: is that apparently the Soviet military unit, possibly just a conservative putsch, or ambitious sort of like a junta. This is what happens with military coups. Once you get military units next to the civilian organs of power, there's often you can do it by coup de main. And I guess they did do the coup de main. But the thing is that the soldiers have to be down for it. The individual soldiers, and they have to be off it. And this is the direct action part of it, is the soldiers have to like be able to live with the, how many people did they shoot to make it happen, and how many soldiers decide to not participate, and that's why it happened the way it did in ours. They could have used some chemical weapons or some way of kind of getting men's fingers off the trigger. We know the KGB likes to do that sleep gas thing, so it's possible that they could have done it. This could have happened. It's fine. With Yeltsin, and this is maybe a decent point of alternate history, like I'm fine with this. With Yeltsin dead and Gorbachev imprisoned in the Crimea, acting Soviet President Yanayev declares the establishment of a renewal government. The governments of Belarusia, Ukraine, and the Baltic states denounced the new government as illegal and declared the Soviet Union to be dissolved. Okay. That's a different way of the Soviet Union ending. That's fine. So basically, it's secession. Specifically, but the thing that's to note is that Belarusia secedes in this way. And we'll visit the topic of Belarusia because it ends up being central to the rest of this chronology. We'll visit that later. In February and March, democratic governments win elections in both Bulgaria and Albania. At the time, Bosnia demands that a Yugoslavian federal troops withdraw from the province, a request which the Serbian-dominated central government refuses. Meanwhile, Greece and the new government of Albania sign a border treaty providing at least one point of stability in the region. Okay, I mean, I'm fine with the way this Yugoslavia situation is developing. It's fine. By mid-year, Slovakian separatists have gained enough seats in the Czech parliamentary elections to force the division of the country into two sovereign states, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. Okay, fine. Catalan and Basque separatists in Spain accelerate their demands for independence. Turkish and Iraqi Kurds become increasingly active, and Turkish military sweeps of Turkish Kurdistan are hampered by the ability of guerrillas to seek sanctuary in the UN-protected northern third of Iraq. Okay. Whatever. I mean, they're doing the thing where they're making fun of, whatever. I'm bothered by that because the Kurds are in a very tough situation, and whatever. The exposure of long-time links between the mafia and key figures within in the Italian government. This has happened recently. Sergio Leone causes a scandal which shakes the very foundations of post-war Italian politics, as well as crippling its economy. As the lira loses value against every other Western currency, there is open talk of industrialized, wealthy northern Italy seceding from southern Italy. After early successes, okay, I mean, whatever, it's fine. It's believable. Italy is always having drama. After early successes in holding down Central Asian unrest, the Soviets suffer several major setbacks. TASS accuses Iran of supplying arms to rebels in Central Asia and Caucasus. Bloody fighting continues with Islamic fundamentalists insurgents growing in strength. Late in the year, some Western observers begin to use the term civil war in referring to the Central Asian unrest. There are often continued riots in the Baltic states, but beefed-up contingents of MVD, internal security troops, maintain a semblance of order. Okay, so this is one of those things where it's just like the coup apparently is able to command some Russian occupying forces in the Baltic states and use them for suppression. And there was a velvet, people just said like, no, Soviets out. And they just kind of, IRL, there was a kind of a general strike. They didn't want any more to do with that. And the Soviet, there wasn't really anybody in the Soviet Union that was willing to fight for that. And so, it happened. So, we can believe that maybe small troops, like doing certain kinds of suppression would be possible. But the thing to keep in mind here is that there's war fatigue from the Afghanistan war specifically. You know, the Soviet soldiers, and specifically the Soviet families and so on. You know, it's like, why are my sons out, you know, in Lithuania, stopping Lithuanians from being independent? That was the question that these people have been asking themselves, and they've been put at liberty to ask themselves by perestroika. And, you know, so I don't know that large deployments would be possible to suppress this stuff, but they could do shady stuff. You know, use gas, low manpower actions, assassinations, the kidnappings, disappearings. The Soviet Republic of Moldavia, made up largely of ethnic Romanians, is torn by riots and strikes demanding political autonomy and an eventual union with Romania. I think that's basically happened. Riots are suppressed by Soviet MVD troops, and Moscow accuses Romania of having secretly encouraged the unrest. Okay, this is hard to believe because Romania is a hot mess. I mean, it would be hard for, you know, Romania to do a lot of active policy, you know, foreign policy or military running operations is, you know, not something that Romania can probably do right now. In the fall, the Romanian government announces the arrest of 5 KGB operatives whom they claim have been encouraging unrest among Romania's Hungarian minority. Okay, I mean, this is all believable, that, you know, there would be accusations rendered by Moscow against Romania, maybe to get them to back off, for example. Yeah, that's what, yeah, or have used tighter border control. In the United States, widespread perceptions of a lack of effective Republican leadership on the drug and trade front and foot-dragging of military demobilization lead to the election of John Tanner, a Democrat from California. Tanner's vice president, Deanna Pemberton, former representative from Ohio, is the first woman to hold such a high elective office. Okay, whatever. Yep. Instead of Bill Clinton, it's a California Republican. All right. In his inaugural address, President Tanner sets the twin national priorities of rebuilding America's deteriorating infrastructure and breaking the double grip of crank and crime that have made the nation's largest cities all but uninhabitable. Well, this is true. I mean, you know, Bill Clinton was a very law and order type president, and he doubled down on the mandatory sentencing and all that stuff. Reductions in the defense budget made possible by the reduced American military presence in Europe are to fund a national reconstruction program and support large increases in law enforcement and anti-drug education. None of these measures have any real effect. Well, that's true. Now, this, I think that, but when they say crank, they're saying like speed, like that there's a speed epidemic rather than a cocaine epidemic. That's interesting. It's that it could use some development, frankly, because your characters might, the speed is, you know, worse, and, you know, Russia's experienced a weird knockoff speed epidemic that's really, you know, has much more ravaging than even regular meth. And so that could be, you know, that could be interesting to explore. And you know, the social effects, how that changes society. It's world building that I feel like it needs to be done, frankly, because this is a difference from the cocaine version, of which, you know, how the level of how epidemic it was is a question. There's, you know, I don't understand everything about that time. It could just be a typo, by the way. Crank. It says crank, but they could be trying to spell crack, because there are some other interesting typos in this book. None of these measures have any real effect. They nailed that one. Dare and so on. The DEA will announce a 250% increase in drug seizures, both from smuggling and domestic crank factories. Okay, they said it 2 times. It sounds a lot like it's meth. This will represent only 4% of the total estimated illegal drug consumption for the year. Okay, prohibition is, and a new war on, like a really strong, huge war on drugs is convulsing the American culture. Tanner is not much more successful on the international scene, but by year's end, he negotiates a withdrawal of Turkish troops from Cyprus and a reunification of the island republic. Okay, sure. After several years of intensive investment in the eastern third of the country, Germany shows little signs of economic progress. Radical right-wing political organizations swell in membership while skinhead violence against foreign workers and handicapped Germans escalates. Well, that kind of did happen a little bit, yeah. Germany's government responds to the threat weakly, seeming to compromise with the right, and passes a strict series of immigration laws, which are widely compared to the Nazi race laws of the 1930s. Well, that's bullshit, frankly, because the Gastarbeiters became like a really strong component of West German culture already by 1993, and I don't know that Germans would be down for that. I don't know. And then the other thing is that the federal nature of the German government, or West German government, the different states, I think it might be more believable if you said like Bavaria, if a right-wing party gained control of Bavaria and started doing this stuff just in Bavaria, like that might be more believable. Because the West German Constitution, the trying to remember what the name of West Germany is. Anyway, the Constitution is set up so that the Weimar issues with parliamentary thresholds are not. It's not supposed to happen. Fighting in Central Asia continues for most of the year, but the Soviet military gradually begins to gain the upper hand and regains control of most of the cities in the region. A guerrilla war continues in the countryside, and many veterans of the fighting in Afghanistan a decade before find themselves fighting in a very similar campaign. Okay, but why? I mean, like, why not just, what they're telling me is that cohesive leadership, secessionist leadership, was maybe decapitated. Like that would be interesting. Like the coup, the junta, which is now in charge in Moscow, just assassinated all the charismatic leaders in the Central Asian republics that led to secessionism and successful secessionism. They just killed those guys. And so there's lots of kind of low-level insurgency and escalation instead of kind of the central, like the thing that you saw happen where it's just they said, we don't want to be part of Soviet Union anymore. Is that cool? And we'll still kind of follow your lead, Commonwealth of Independent States. And there was kind of mutual agreement on that topic. Like Baikonur Cosmodrome is in Kazakhstan. The large amount of, the intercontinental ballistic missile capacity of the Soviet Union remains in Kazakhstan. The accord was reached. And it's, so it could just be that this new government in Moscow is just very brutal and willing to use, bad tactics to kind of hold on to power. I could see that as a possibility. Like literally Vladimir Putin is maybe in charge, actually, in 1992. That's a story. Sporadic anti-government rioting in Pyongyang and other large cities forced the North Korean government to make further concessions towards a free market economy. That's I'm not going to comment on that because it doesn't come into play later. But that's a bit naive to how North Korea works. Fighting continues in the former republics of Yugoslavia and becomes increasingly bitter. There is now talk of reunifying the country instead of ethnic groups fighting as a large slice for territory. Instead, ethnic groups fight for a large slice of territory as possible and deal ruthlessly with the people of other ethnic groups living in their regions. The lucky ones become refugees. That happened. And this is where interventionism also started to occur. Like the United Nations, after the Russian collapse, was able to pass Security Council resolutions and got into Yugoslavia late, but arrested some of the worst of this. As Europe shows signs of increasing instability, so far I haven't heard anything really out of character for Europe. Italy had drama and a change of government. Okay, when does Italy not have drama? I mean, Germany begins quietly increasing its force structure. Really? How? With what money? In January of 1994, the 9 understrength divisions which had been maintained as a token army are brought up to full strength, and each is given a territorial reserve brigade. I could see this as a, like a form of ballooning employment. That's what the Chinese like to do. In China, underground pro-democracy organizations with encouragement and financial aid from relatives in other countries begin demonstrating in many of China's larger cities. Okay. While these remain relatively peaceful for a while, they soon erupt into violence, forcing military intervention. Better prepared than the students of 1989, the pro-democracy factions of the Northeast hold out for months before the military manages to restore order. Okay, so around Beijing, there are successful Hong Kong-like democracy protests. Okay, I can believe that. Elsewhere, things settle down more quickly. Some regional military commanders, increasingly mistrustful of the local government to maintain order, begin taking matters into their own hands. I could see this in the sense that maybe like in the cities where the uprisings held on, it could have been through complicity with, sympathetic local officials. I could see that. And that, some Chinese military people just sort of push things into their own ways, maybe like putting puppets or token people to carry out their deeds in the civilian sector. I can see a little bit of that. Within a year, many regions are effectively ruled by military commanders, modern versions of Chinese tradition. So this really escalated quickly. What about the Chinese Communist Party? I mean, frankly, that's just, I can't believe that the Chinese Communist Party would allow the Red Army part to gain this big of a power structure, to gain that much authority. It would represent a split in the structure of the country. That the CCP would be very wary of, and maybe the author is not really aware of. I mean, the CCP after Madame Mao, after the Cultural Revolution, it's much more cohesive. It's not really kind of like the In Club to score. It's sort of a lifetime sort of mafia. Service guarantees citizenship. Would you like to know more? Yeah. And so people defend that. Defend the people who are part of that in club of the CCP. Defend it and see it as a means to advance in society. Researchers in France and the United States begin testing a vaccine which shows every sign of being effective against the human against AIDS. Researchers soon yield to demands for an accelerated testing program, and the U.S. FDA waives animal tests in favor of immediate large-scale human experimentation. What? What? On who? On whom? Who wants to get an AIDS vaccine tested on them? An untested AIDS vaccine tested on them? Why would I want to do that? What if it gave me AIDS? What? What? Still, it will be several years before the pharmaceutical firms can gear up to produce the vaccine in sufficient quantities to deal with the massive outbreaks of the disease in third world countries. Central Africa, in particular, is facing complete collapse of its healthcare system under an avalanche of AIDS victims, and many healthcare professionals leave the region out of fear for their own lives. And it's not true. I mean, that's not untrue. I mean, there were some crisis years with AIDS in Africa. It's kind of unfortunate how it's. I don't know. I don't know how key Africa plays a role in this timeline. It doesn't seem to. Which, I have comments about that too. In China, the central government is increasingly dominated by hardline nationalists who are supported by North Chinese warlords. New demands for border adjustments are made against the Soviet Union, and it is felt that given the Soviet internal problems, this might be the time to press for them internationally. Okay, so okay, the China wants border adjustments from the USSR. Talks produce no tangible results, and radical Chinese nationalist junior officers provoke increasingly violent border incidents. Okay, I can believe that. After a period of increasing tension and escalating border incidents, full-scale war erupts between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. What? What? I mean, full-scale war. We didn't go to like air war. We didn't go to like cruise missile exchanges. Where's the intermediary between border shenanigans to full-scale war? So I'd like that. Where's that story? The Red Army enjoys initial success, and tank columns roar deep into the northern Chinese industrial heartland. Okay, so where's the Chinese nuclear mines that are, reportedly in the bed of the Amur River? We like, this is an open secret now. Like there are nuclear mines along the Soviet Chinese border. And there have been for quite a way. Where's that? And where's the the escalation to tactical nuclear? And I think entirely possible. If we saw a large scale territorial incursion into China, that there would be a willingness to escalate to a symbolic nuclear strike, not counter force, but you nuke the Kremlin, or you try to. So it seems like China would have tried to nuke the Kremlin if China was getting invaded by like divisions of Russians. And they were losing. If they were losing that badly, they'd be like, let's nuke the Kremlin, or let's say we're going to nuke the Kremlin, and then let's go to the UN and say, America, we're going to have to nuke the Kremlin. Can you please try and make this stop? And then America would be like, we will negotiate a peace between the Chinese and the Russians, or we will have to use our nuclear, or we'll put our forces on alert. And so maybe that's a good source of brinksmanship, but we just blow past it. China's like literally getting hugely invaded, and they don't like use their nuclear arsenal for what nuclear arsenals are for: existential threats. However, the Chinese surpass expectations of most military analysts in their ability to mobilize reserves from the interior and shift them to the fighting front. Okay, sure. While the Soviets continue to make impressive gains, their losses mount, and the tempo of advance slows. And this is where my credulity has just really faltered, because it's just like, why? It's just why isn't there a nuclear exchange happening here in this full scale? We suddenly escalated to a full scale war between China and Russia, and it's like an afterthought. Soon, large bodies of citizen militia are operating in the rear areas, attacking installations and destroying supply convoys. More and more frontline troops have to be detailed to mopping up these patches of guerrilla resistance, and the advance grinds to a halt. Yeah, I mean, this is an advantage that the CCP has, and generally, any this is one of the party-led communist state has, is that there's very easy to form partisan cells out of the civilian party apparatus. So, sure. When the main Chinese conventional forces counterattack, to the amazement of the world's military experts, large pockets of Soviet troops are formed. Okay. Most of the Soviet unions, due to their superior mobility and tremendous firepower, are able to fight their way out of the pockets, but Soviet losses are great, and the front is shattered. Okay. The Soviet Union has already been mobilizing additional troops from the Western military districts and is now placed on an emergency priority basis, but the Far Eastern Front has become a meat grinder which devours divisions as quickly as they can be committed. Motor vehicles and railroad rolling stock are increasingly drawn out of the civilian sector to support the war effort. As the first snows of winter fall, military units in Belarusia and Ukraine declare their support for the separatist governments which had been suppressed 2 years earlier. So this is believable. It's like, I don't want to go fight in China, man. So I instead will support the independence of Belarusia. I'm going to support Belarusia, because if I support Belarusia and it becomes independent, I won't have to go to China. Now, where's my family, though? Is my family in Russia? These are the questions which have to go through the minds of soldiers and officers. In response to increasing regional instability, Germany declares its agreement on size and location of armed forces obsolete in relation to the current European situation. The 6 Eastern Territorial Brigades are immediately expanded to weak divisions, while the original 9 divisions are expanded to 12, and additional troops being divided by the mobilization of reserve units from the western part of the country. Poland protests. Well, of course they would. I mean, like, where's Germany getting like billions of bucks to like make a giant military? And like, what are the consequences of the German economy? Can they really militarize this quickly? You know, internally with internal resources. Like, what does the world say about this? Is there sanctions? Like, the power of economic sanctions seems to be largely neglected in this narrative. Like, completely neglected. These talks weekly break down over the status of the border city of Bialystok and okay. These talks weekly break down over the status of the border city of Bialystok, however, and Belarus publicly announces that Poland has attempted to involve it in a military adventure against Germany. Okay, sure. All right. Yeah, the very young government of Belarus gets into negotiations and talks with Poland, and and then it breaks down, and you know, to score political points, the new leaders of Belarus say this about, you know, what's going on. They pick a side, and they need to, because they need to have allies, because eventually the Soviet Union will turn around and come back for their country. Okay, I can believe that. But the thing is that Belarus is basically, there's a bunch of Russians in Belarus, and they identify as Russians. And we've learned that, you know, over the past 20 years. The interesting thing is that there are differences, you know, that have emerged as far as the way that these governments and the ability of Putin to control you know, what's going on in Belarus is apparently not very high, because, you know, there's a large civil society that is protesting the current regime right now in Belarus and resisting this electoral coup de main by the dictator. Okay. In Romania, anti-government demonstrations by Magyars in several Transylvanian cities are suppressed by Romanian riot control police, with some loss of life. Okay, I guess I can believe this. I mean, the Hungarian government again protests the mistreatment of these people at the hands of what they claimed is an increasingly genocidal government. Okay, so I guess the post-Ceausescu government is, again, more brutal. This is one of the future fiction things that they're doing, is that this is one of their divergences that I wish would be called out, frankly. That you need to highlight this. It's because like, that makes no sense unless I then connect the dots about how it's different. Several days of and I don't know what year this was written in, maybe it's speculative. Several days of anti-Turkish rioting in Bulgaria are touched off when a Bulgarian national arrested for attempting to assassinate the president of the Turkish Republic dies in custody. And I have a theory about the author and the point of view that it's being written from, which I've arrived at, which I'll get to at the end of this paragraph. Despite Turkish protestations that his death was from natural causes, the incident soon assumes crisis proportions, and Turkish citizens are advised to leave Bulgaria. Okay, so there's an escalation between Turkey and Bulgaria. That's fine. So the theory that I have is that this is written before we got to know, or we became familiar with, the character of the post-Soviet, post-Warsaw Bloc governments. And kind of the author believes that they're maybe more mustache twirling, you know, when put under pressure, they do worse things. And it's like, the thing is that Slobodan Milosevic is sort of the exception. Turns out. That's what we learned. And it's just, that's maybe something that we didn't know in 1991 or whatever year this was written in. Later that year, United Nations peacekeeping forces are sent to Sri Lanka to intervene in a war there. Okay. The UN did something somewhere, just not in Europe for some reason. Faced with stalemate in the Far East and the revolt in the West, the Soviets need more troops. So that's kind of salient, isn't it? The UN went and did something in Sri Lanka, but somehow isn't doing something in Europe. Like, why? Most Soviet Category B readiness divisions are mobilized and sent to the Far East by mid-year, and almost a quarter of the remaining Category A divisions from the Western European frontier divisions are committed. Many of the low readiness categories, whatever, okay, large list of categories of guys. Soviet manpower is, we could just say Soviet manpower is very depleted by the nuclear exchanges in the Chinese border conflict. They've lost a lot of guys, and they're starting to mobilize more guys. With an uncertain Germany to the west and an increasingly aggressive Belarus to the east, Poland opens secret talks with Moscow. Okay, who is Poland? Why would Poland do that? Why wouldn't Poland just ask to join NATO? Which is what Poland actually did. What? Poland spent like the last 15 years, Solidarnosc and so on, trying to win self-determination and trying to get the Catholic Church, to not, be underground and suppressed. Lots of things. I mean, like, I don't know. It seems kind of weird that they would do that. You need to tell me why Poland. Who's in charge of Poland? Which person? Like, can you name some names? That's one of the things that this narrative doesn't do. Is it talks about these countries as these kind of inanimate objects, besides the U.S. president. Okay. Surrounded by okay. Within months, these talks result in the public signing of a mutual defense agreement between the Soviet Union, Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. Okay, sure. The treaty is signed in Warsaw and is officially called the Treaty on Collective Security. The world calls it the New Warsaw Pact. Okay, sure. Surrounded by enemies, Belarus resistance quickly collapses, and to the shock of the West, it is partitioned by Poland and the Soviets. Okay, I can kind of believe that, except it's just maybe just like, the Soviets would just, install a puppet regime. They would just find, some people, that they hadn't killed yet, or pick a guy and say he's always lived here. He's in charge now. Look at him. He's great. And then have KGB guys following around, telling him everything to do. That's what So the partition part, I just don't know. Like, the Soviet actor is strong enough that I don't know why they would need to make any territorial concessions to Poland. Like, what reason would they do that? So the partition may be Białystok, I don't know, or something like that. Maybe that's what they do, is they cede this claim to Białystok that has been interjected here. But the capability discrepancy is large enough that that's one of the things that we learned from the Iraq War of 2003 and the 1991 one, is that when the superpower does something, it's done. In the little minor regional powers, the little people, they really can't, this is why Assad is where they are, is because, Putin tells him, what to eat for dinner. Like, there's just, what's going on in Syria is not up to Bashar al-Assad. And so that's, it's kind of similarly like, okay, Russians are busting up this little nascent Belarus. Okay. Okay. So a wave of demonstrations in Western Poland by ethnic Germans supported by 7 soldiers is violently suppressed by riot police, resulting in several deaths and numerous injuries. Germany protests and moves several divisions closer to the border. Okay. I don't know. I could see that sort of happening, and maybe escalating. like some sort of like direct action, in some town, escalating for some reason in Poland, and it turning into an incident, and maybe some mobilization from Germany, with this fantastically large army that I don't know where Germany's getting it, and I don't know why the world wouldn't put sanctions on them. In June, a small group of senior officers of the German army, as well as at least one German cabinet minister, opened secret talks with the leadership of several German ethnic organizations in eastern Poland. Okay, so this is sort of believable. Okay, is that like a cabal, a junta, a small group of officers conspire to create a casus belli. It's a little too similar to how World War II started, but okay. Shortly thereafter, another round of demonstrations break out and again are violently suppressed. This time, however, small groups of demonstrators fight back with military small arms. Okay, all right. I mean, it's no longer a demonstration. I mean, the line between like a social movement, a direct action, and so on, and like insurgency with guerrilla war carrying around Uzis is a really big line, actually. Like, it's a really big line. And as much as you see in the U.S. These streets in the U.S. now with people like going to protests with ARs and so on, it's like I still put it to you that it's armed insurrections, like and especially once you start shooting at the cops, like it's just different. Okay, so German right-wing nationalists who cross the border with collaborate. Okay, Polish army units move in, and soon Pomerania and Silesia appear to be in the grips of a civil war. Okay. Poland charges that many of the rebels are German right-wing nationalists who have crossed the border with collaboration of the German army. So this is sort of believable, is that there's a skinhead cult that arises in Germany and has clandestine support from the German army and is supported enough to then start engaging in the sort of adventurism that we see in Ukraine with the Russian-backed militias in eastern Ukraine. That's a believable scenario. Kind of. Polish army units move in, and soon Pomerania. Okay, yeah. Berlin denies any involvement with the rioters, but admits that it is possible that German nationals have crossed into Poland, and German military units move closer to the border to step up security. Okay, yeah, there's porous borders with. I mean, again, I'm not really sure if Pomerania and Silesia really have that many people who identify as German in 1990 to cause this to occur. But we can imagine that maybe like Voice of America Radio or somebody like creates, like manufactures an identity. Like way back in 1983 or something, some very clever person at the CIA decides to start cultivating this ethnic German identity in Poland as a chip, and then it later kind of backfires and takes on a life of its own. That's a story. That sounds like some Cold War stuff. That sounds like how things spiral out of control, like World War One. And that sort of feeling of geopolitics, of creativity around geopolitics, which the Clancy and company, tend to do. The Robert Ludlums, like I just feel like the author is maybe, I don't know, just not read in that stuff for something's going on here. I'm not compelled by this because it lacks that sort of origination. In mid-July, there are several border incidents between the units of the Polish and German armies and frequent exchanges of artillery fire. On June 27, elements of the German Third Corps crossed the frontier in retaliation for what they described as a full-scale attack by the Polish 4th Mechanized Division. Within 2 days, Poland and Germany are officially at war. So I can believe, again, that these rogue elements within the German military then proceed into a territorial incursion into Poland as kind of a choreographed, like deliberate move to create an open state of war. Okay, I can kind of believe that. From the very beginning, where's the de-escalation? That's one of the things. Is where are all the people who brought down the Berlin Wall? like the direct actors? Where's the give people peace a chance people? Within Germany that may actually be standing in front of the tanks trying to go into Poland, because like that's a known memory. People remember German tanks going into Poland. It happened before. Like, so this is the thing, is that I just like, as much as like the author is willing to empower the skinheads, to empower the right wingers, the author is not really willing to acknowledge the power of social movements outside of the right wing. It seems like, including central, including status quo, just sort of center right, like, and no, please, let's just kind of continue to rebuild our country. The ability of people to say no, or to hold up this stuff happening. Germany has just finished a period of very rapid growth and rebuilding. Sounds like there's been conscription. It sounds like that also means that a lot of the soldiers maybe are not acculturated to the war. They're not acculturated to the army. Their loyalties are not well cultivated. Many of its units being equipped with tanks and vehicles that have sat idle in warehouses for 4 or 5 years. The Poles and Soviets are at the end of several years of very limited military spending, capped by a war in the East, which has been drawn off much of their best equipment already. The Poles are supported by 3 Soviet divisions stationed in Poland as part of the new Warsaw Pact Joint Command, but are still outnumbered by the Germans. What tips the balance against the Germans is the entry of the Czech army in the war on the side of the new Warsaw Pact. Okay, I just like, but Czech doesn't have, Czechoslovakia doesn't have Slovakia. Like, how many people are there in Czechoslovakia, like, to support like a tip the balance? I guess enough. I mean, they could do some probing attacks, like again into Bavaria. I could see that. They could kind of pull off enough force. But again, where's the tactical nukes? Like, where's the threat to escalate to tactical nukes? Like the blowing the whistle. Ooh, I'm going to use my tactical nukes if you cross this line. This is the red line. If you cross this river, I'm going to use my tactical nukes. And that's the security that the Americans provided to Germany for 40 years. Is that. And so, like, I don't know, like, why not? Why, like, you don't want to lose your country. Poland, of all countries, does not want to lose its country. I'm pretty sure that they would go call their new Soviet friends on the phone and be like, can you, like, maybe get some tactical nuclear weapons around here, please? By the end of November, the Bundeswehr is in serious trouble. Soviet frontal aviation has left their most modern aircraft in the West. These are qualitatively and quantitatively a match for the Luftwaffe. The Czech army finally cracks the line of German reservists holding the southern flank and cuts north into Germany itself, closing in on Berlin. So this is one of the things that I think is underestimated here, is the power of an air campaign. Is that if the Russians are able to achieve air superiority and destroy the German air defenses and do the whole shock and awe thing that we saw versus Saddam, maybe we didn't really know how the level of prosecution that a superpower can do with, like, guided missiles and jets and all the things that the Soviets totally have, according to this. Like, that's what, we did it to Yugoslavia, and we did it to Saddam, and it worked. And I think that the Soviet Union could do it to Germany. Or if the Soviets started to try to do it, once they got to that point of being able to prosecute, shock and awe, command and control attacks against German infrastructure, then the American, air umbrella comes in, and, it starts to, like, Germany says, hey, you have to protect me. My civilians are getting hurt by these bombs. This is not, oh. And so then the American planes, why won't you do it? And that starts to happen. And then in the American Senate, it's like, the John McCain Hawk guys, like, we got to protect our friends. And so very quickly, it would go to there, and then there would have to be some sort of ceasefire, or it would escalate to and so, but instead it's this weird, like, weak tea thing. claiming that their actions were justified by the military provocations of Poland and that they are now face dismemberment as a state. Germany turns to NATO partners for assistance. Well, it's a defensive alliance, and your NATO partners would have had something to say a lot sooner than that. With the political leadership of the European members of NATO, while they debate the prudence of intervention, the U.S. Army crosses the frontier. Okay, I mean, I can imagine this. I can imagine that the American... What has America been doing with all these other brushfire wars? That's kind of a question. And, maybe America is going to prove out, like, Patriot missiles. They have to get their Patriot missiles, like, into Germany to protect Germany from medium-range ballistic missiles. I can believe that. Yeah, like, we got to get those Patriot missiles on the ground, protecting Germany, except they're already there. Like, they never left in our timeline. I mean, we drew down some forces, but in Central Europe. But, in 1992, in our timeline, there's still a lot of American military presence, including, MRBM and interceptors and so on. While the political leadership of the European members of NATO debate the prudence of intervention, France, Belgium, Italy, and Greece first demand that U.S. troops withdraw to their start line. These demands have no effect. Well, that's accurate. Like America didn't listen to anybody telling them not to invade Iraq in 2003. Withdrawal from NATO, and they withdraw from NATO in process. Well, that has never happened. I don't know why in this timeline it would be, but France. I could imagine there's a French president who's going to follow through on his ultimatum. I could imagine that. British and Canadian forces cross the border, however, while Danish and Dutch troops remain in place. Well, we know the UK likes to follow along with modern day America, or rather they did in 2003. They did in fact invade Iraq with us. And was it to their benefit? I don't know. Probably not. But they did it anyway out of a sense of alliance. Okay. British and Canadian forces cross the border, however, while Danish and Dutch troops remain in place, still partners in NATO, but not party to war. Okay, yeah, it's a war of aggression on the part of Germany. It's a defensive alliance. In the far north, Soviet troops make a bid for a quick victory in northern Norway. What? Soviets are just attacking Norway now? What? I mean, Norway's in NATO, I guess, but what possessed them to do that? Why didn't they just say hey, Norway, why don't you sit this one out? And they have a high level diplomatic meeting, like the king of Norway is sitting down and sipping tea with the Russian ambassador, and it's like, I promise not to take part in this military adventure with the between America and Germany, and my country will remain steadfast and neutral. I just. Why, that seems much more to their benefit than this. But again, maybe the Soviet diplomatic corps is gutted because they're it's not down for this weird, brutal new regime. Most of the best Arctic equipped divisions have already been sent east. However, the third line troops available are unable to break through the paratroopers and Marines landed in NATO's rear areas. So they attacked Norway with bad troops, with poor quality troops. As crack British commandos and U.S. Marines join the battle, the front line moves east again towards the Soviet naval facilities on the Kola Peninsula. Okay, and the elite Soviet paratroopers and Marines are isolated and destroyed. So the American military presence was able to push into Russia again. Where are the tactical nukes? Where is the the willingness to use air power? American military elements are moving across the Soviet frontier. Where's the planes? Where's the red phone ringing in the White House? And the Russian, the Soviet premier is calling the American president. If your troops take one step into Soviet Russia, they will find the damnation of nuclear power that will send them into the fires of hell. And I think your best interests lie stand in the path of peace. So the DEFCON should be escalating here. What's this weird mutual agreement to keep the DEFCON low? It should be it's just strange. At sea, the Soviet Red Banner Northern Fleet you know that song? It's by Judas Priest. 2 minutes to midnight. So it should be midnight now, and there's full nuclear exchange. Why is it not happening? Is there some kind of disarmament treaty that you're not telling me about that happened? At sea, the Soviet Red Banner Northern Fleet sorties and attempts to break through the Greenland-Iceland United Kingdom gap into the North Atlantic. Okay, Soviet submarines are always operating in the North Atlantic. For 3 weeks, the opposing fleets hammer each other, but the Western Fleet comes out on top, badly bloodied but victorious. I mean, surface warfare, I don't know. I mean, I think that they would probably be trying to support, they would be interdicting Allied air power and trying to attack Allied shipping, within the White Sea and trying to push down in the North Sea. I don't know why they want to push into the North Atlantic. It seems like, I mean, they would have their land-based air power. The Soviet Navy has a significant land-based air arm, by the way. So why would they push out? I don't know. So for 3 weeks, the opposing fleets hammer each other, but the Western Fleet comes out on top, badly bloodied but victorious. Okay, all right. 80% of the Soviet Northern Fleet's surface tonnage rests on the bottom of the Norwegian and North Seas. Scattered commerce raiders break out, however, aka submarines, which are, a huge component of, I guess, maybe the Soviet fleet is trying to engage destroyers and deplete the anti-submarine warfare capacity of the UK fleet. Okay, I guess maybe that's what their goal is to try and destroy the destroyers so that the submarines can act with a free hand. And by year's end, are wreaking havoc on the NATO convoys and bringing reinforcements, ammunition, and equipment across that are, okay. So, yeah. When Romanian police shoot and kill a man crossing the border between Hungary and Romania, I find this whole part of the story with Roman, I just don't think it's important. I'm going to skip it. Okay, so basically, the Romanian regime is mean, and the Bulgarians, who are in a new Warsaw Pact with Russia, and Hungary joins in with them to attack Romania. And then Romania appeals to NATO for assistance. Okay, why should NATO listen? I mean, they're horrible, and there's they got a lot of other things on their plate. I mean, I guess there is a war going on right now, and opportunistically, enemy of my enemy is my friend. But, again, the overestimation of, Romania's, capability right now, because Ceausescu drove the country into the ground building a giant palace and just looting the place. And, within 24 hours, 3 divisions and 5 brigades cross into Romania, and 2 days later are at the front of under Romanian command, where they're joined by Serbian Expeditionary Force. The Ukraine also recognizes the incorporation of Moldavia into Romania. Okay, so Ukraine allies with Romania in the new Romanian conflict, and Yugoslavia, which apparently has settled down its problems, I guess. There's a Serbian Expeditionary Force, which is now in Romania. Okay, I could believe some of this stuff. But, NATO's responds shortly after with the offer of full membership in the alliance for both nations, which they accept. Okay. More concrete assistance takes the form of the First Turkish Army, which launches its offensive against a thin Bulgarian covering force in Turkey wanting to get its hands dirty, or get into the mess, get it mixed up in a territorial adventurism of Turkish relevance. That's fine. I guess it's believable. The Ciandro Lumoso, Shining Path through stuff in Peru. Yeah, okay. Stuff in Peru happens. We remembered that South America exists for a second. But it doesn't matter because, I don't know. Or rather, the author doesn't want anything that's going on in America right now with the crank epidemic, for example. And how about that President Tanner? How is things going for him? How are midterm elections? I think he needed to get reelected. It's 1997 now. There was an election. Maybe this war was a relevant issue. On the first day of the new year, NATO heads of state declare their support for a Polish government in exile headed by a committee of Polish emigres. While the news is greeted with scattered worker uprisings in Poland, the majority of the Polish army remains loyal to the central government, and open resistance is soon crushed. Okay. An underground movement begins forming, however, and by spring, small guerrilla bands, leavened by Polish army deserters, begin to harass Warsaw Pact supply convoys and installations. Okay, I don't understand exactly why Poland has decided to flip to the NATO side. I guess maybe Germany has ceased to become relevant. Like the German regime has basically been toppled and crippled by the Soviet air offensive, the early air offensive. We'll speculate that. During January, continuing Turkish successes in Bulgaria, blah, 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 blah. This part is not particularly important. In late February, the socialist governments of Italy and Greece conclude a mutual defense pact. They're socialist, okay? They're socialist. That doesn't make them part of the bad guys team, the Warsaw Pact team. While Italy is not obligated by the pact to enter the Greco-Turkish War, the Italian government declares the war to be a regional conflict unrelated to the more general war raging elsewhere, promising to intervene on Greece's side if NATO tries to tip the balance in Turkey's favor. Okay, within a week, Greece declares a naval blockade against Turkey and warns the world shipping that the Aegean is now considered a war zone. Okay, I mean, the Greek Navy is large enough, and it has like surface to surface missiles on their ships. They could maybe try and do that. In an attempt to restore the situation in Germany, Soviet and Czech troops return to the offensive in southern Germany, but do not have the strength to make any significant gains. Well, sure, because tactical nuclear weapons exist. With the coming of spring, the NATO offensive gains momentum, and in April, the first German troops cross the frontier into Poland. Okay. Yeah, lots of more back and forth, like it was the Korean War. By June 17th, Warsaw is surrounded, and Polish army units and the citizens of the city prepare for a siege. By the late spring, NATO's Atlantic Fleet has hunted down the last of the Soviet commerce raiders, and surviving attack carriers and missile cruisers move to northern waters. The NATO drive in the north has bogged down on the banks of the Litsa River, but the Northern Front commander now contemplates a bold move to destroy the remnants of Soviet naval power there. Again, really? And also, the Soviets have a Black Sea fleet, and there's a Baltic fleet. And what about those? Especially the Black Sea fleet. While the U.S. and British units, I mean, it seems like they would demand navigation from the Turks, and then that would be a source of escalation. While the U.S. and British units attempt, and so the Turks really, it seems like they would be neutral right here in this war, just for that reason. While the U.S. and British units attempt a rapid outflanking move through northern Finland, the NATO Atlantic Fleet will close on Murmansk and Severodonetsk, subjecting the Soviet fleet to anchorages and air bases to a massive bombardment. On June 7th, the ground offensive is launched, and the fleet closes on the Kola Peninsula shortly thereafter. So yeah, we've already heard that Soviet air power is, doing fine. So we have to contemplate why couldn't the Soviets do things? It's feasible that they probably could mount some sort of incursions out the back of in the Caucasus, for example. And so it seems like they would be able to force Turkey's hands to declare neutrality and let them navigate through. So that seems like there's a policy objective of Black Sea navigation that the Soviets want, so that they can access and commerce raid in the Mediterranean, and it's worth a pretty high price, which they would be willing to pay to get out of the Black Sea, and so that same price would then buy Turkey out of the war, and I don't see that calculus having occurred in this story. Okay. Finland. Okay. Finland has been accepted to offer token resistance to the evaluation. So the Finnish army fights tenaciously, seriously delaying this flanking move. This whole Norwegian front is just, I can't. It's hard to believe. The coastal missile boats remain remnants of Northern Fleet shore-based naval aviation inflict crippling losses on the NATO fleet. Yeah, of course they do, because tactical nuclear weapons exist. And this is a full-blown war, and they'd be using them in the sea battle, too. In the south, the front in Romania stabilizes and energizes, even if there hasn't been a strategic exchange. Like, the tactical nukes would be on the table at this point. They would be released. And it's hard to believe that why they haven't been already. In the south, the front in Romania stabilizes. Soviet mobilization-only divisions, largely leg mobile, and stiffened with a sprinkling of obsolete tanks and armored personnel carriers, enter the lines. Okay, so here's the thing: the Soviet economy, like, it has no trading partners. Like, it wasn't doing great at the time anyway. Like, its ability to sustain this level of mobilization for this kind of duration, especially given like this shakeup with the regime, and there's this new regime which is, achieved power through brutal means, and its mandate is wobbly. It's hard for me to believe that they're capable of maintaining this level of war for this long, especially because there have been mutinies of Soviet troops. After all, there was the one in Belarusia. Also, what happened in what happened in China? Did they settle that? Did they settle that? What happened there? Did we forget about that? The best Soviet troops are shipped further south to Bulgaria and may have managed to halt the Turkish drive. Okay. On June 27th, a NATO convoy of fast transports and cargo ships, accompanied by a strong covering force, attempts the run into the Turkish port of Izmir with badly needed ammunition and equipment. Light fleet elements of the Greek Navy intercept the convoy in a confused night of action off Izmir, inflict substantial losses, and escape virtually unharmed. 2 days later, NATO retaliates with airstrikes against Greek naval bases. I can kind of see this. I mean, except for I don't exactly understand why Greece is escalating with Turkey. Yeah, and the whole Turkey part doesn't gel for me. In early Turkey ended up having its hand forced into neutrality in World War II because of the Black Sea. Again, same thing. Is that they hold the straits, but they're not powerful enough to hold the straits. And that's one of the things that Egypt has. Why Egypt is so militarized is specifically and maintains such a huge army and has a large population to be able to maintain it on a large agricultural base to be able to maintain it. Is that's Turkey just. I'm sorry. I don't know. I just don't know that Turkey really has the same capability. We're seeing them do some things with their field divisions now in Syria and in Kurdistan. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. In early July, Italian air mobile and Alpine units crossed the passes into Tyrolia. Okay, why? Okay, now Italy is invading Austria. Why? The Italian army enjoys tremendous success at the first month of involvement in the war, particularly but why did they get involved? I don't understand why they got involved. And why is Austria in this war? I mean, they were very neutral for all of the Cold War. In Asia, okay, so India and Pakistan get into a war. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so on July 9th, now the Soviets use tactical nuclear weapons. Okay. They used only against troop concentrations further than 50 kilometers from the Soviet border. In the Far East, they are used on a massive scale. Yeah, as I can't believe that the Chinese wouldn't have used them already. Chinese mechanism columns are vaporized, caught in the open, and roads in imagined pursuit. Strike aircraft deliver warheads on the northern Chinese population and industrial centers still in Chinese hands. The Chinese response is immediate, but Soviet forward troop units are dispersed and well prepared. Okay, well, why is there not a strategic strike on Moscow? The Chinese have ICBMs. This is existential. China's going to cease to exist. It's getting nuked. Why wouldn't they escalate? Ballistic missile attacks are okay. Well, here's a Soviet population centers are frustrated by active and efficient ABM system, and the Soviet Air Defense Command massacres the handful of Chinese bombers that attempted low-level penetration raids. Okay, all right. So, next piece of fiction. Soviets develop a good anti-ICBM capability. The Soviets get Star Wars. Soviets have Star Wars in this timeline. Maybe that's actually why we're seeing this, is that the Soviets have Star Wars. And so everybody's gun shy on using nukes because the Soviets have effective Star Wars. You know, there's that satellite that they launched in 1989, I think. That was supposed to have a big old laser on it, and it was supposed to shoot other satellites. That was its point. And it was huge. Anyway, they launched it backwards on the rocket. And then it had to turn around to finish going into orbit, had to separate from the rocket, and then turn around and boost into orbit. And it crashed. And so maybe we can fantasize that they have like a dozen of those, and the Soviet Union has Star Wars. And so, you know, like strategic ballistic missiles are out of the picture. Did I read that? Did I miss that? I don't think I missed that. That's, you know, that ICBMs were taken out of the picture, or are, you know, are a big gamble because there's now effective Star Wars. Because the other thing is that, I mean, MIRVs exist, by the way. MIRVs exist. And that, what I mean is multiply independent or re-entry vehicles. So what happens is a single ICBM goes up, and then when it's in space, it separates into like eight little missiles that are coming down out of the sky and are independently targetable with megaton yields. And so, you know, like if you have to hit it in the boost phase while it's going up. That's the current, you know, ABM strategy with America, is to hit it with a laser while it's going up and just get it to fall back in the ocean or whatever. If you don't hit it while it's going up, you know, if you hit it when it's coming down, then you got problems. So the Soviet, you know, this Soviet Star Wars has to be able to zap the missiles from space. You know, it has to be over the horizon ability to zap missiles from space, or I guess from the upper atmosphere. They could have like really high altitude planes that are blanketing the Chinese border. Sounds expensive. Anywho, yeah, the technology part of this that like rules out the strategic exchanges before this point it's hard to understand. Okay. Okay. On September 15th, the siege of Warsaw is lifted and a week later, the Czech and Italian troops begin a renewed offensive in southern Germany. Okay, so why is Italy on the side of the Russians? I mean, they just elected a socialist government, not a communist government that was like ready to ally with the Soviet Union. Like, that's a pretty radical shift. Like you probably should have mentioned that. Like, this is socialist is not the same thing as communist. Like Helmut Kohl, Chancellor of Germany in 1989. I'm pretty sure he's a socialist. It's just, I don't know what to say. Some of these things is just like like this enthusiasm for Italy to be fighting other European countries is I don't know. They've been, these soldiers, the Italian soldiers are side by side with, other NATO countries doing all the exercises and so on. And, now they're going to go brother against brother. I don't know. The NATO countries turning on each other and this brother against brother stuff again, if we were to name names and kind of get into like little vignettes of like, this Greek captain like decided to just, the Greek captain and the Turkish captain decided to not fight today. And this is how a ceasefire started. There's lots of like windows for de-escalation that comes from the shared esprit de corps of NATO that, especially with this brush fire stuff where NATO countries are turning on each other, I'm just not seeing. Soviet and Bulgarian forces in Thrace also began a major offensive against the Turks in September. The one-sided use of tactical nuclear weapons breaks the stalemate, and by month's end, Bulgarian tank brigades are racing towards Istanbul. Yeah, again, this is like seems like that should have happened like 2 years ago, as far as like, specifically like I don't know, Istanbul should already have like a puppet like Soviet ruler, or be a cratered, because they need the navigation of the Black Sea. Simultaneously, Greek and Albanian troops launched a drive against Soviet Serbia, southern Serbia, and the Serbian army begins to break up. This is notwithstanding the fact that the Americans may have like nuclear mines in the Straits of Izmir that they didn't bother to tell anybody about. The Serbian Expeditionary Force in Romania is recalled home for defense, but before it can return, Belgrade has fallen to Italian mechanized columns. At the same time, the limited use of tactical nuclear weapons, the increasing numbers of Soviet reserves, and the withdrawal of the Yugoslavians caused the Romanian front to collapse. Hey, where's France in all this? France, the nuclear-armed, it likes to shake its nuclear arm around in people's face and talk about how it's the Europe's real big boy. What is their role in all this? This valiant neutrality. It's not really what they usually do. I mean, they like to get involved in all kinds of crazy stuff, shenanigans in Africa, and show how competent they remain. The French military really knows how to get things done. That's what they like to do, is show off in Central Africa. So why wouldn't they be showing off in this story? All right, in the West, NATO units and NATO air units begin making deep nuclear strikes against communication hubs in Czechoslovakia and Poland in an attempt to slow the Warsaw Pact advance. The Pact responds with similar strikes against German industrial targets and major port cities. NATO's Theater nuclear missiles are launched against an array of industrial targets and port cities in the Western Soviet Union. MRBMs. Okay. Throughout October, the exchanges continue, escalating gradually. Well, here's the thing. Once there's Star Wars, you're not going to get that escalating gradually type thing. Once there's Star Wars and there's the ability to intercept missiles, and I mean, I guess maybe the Chinese missiles are really bad and low tech. We can believe that for 1990. But once you are not sure whether whether and how much Star Wars works, you have to launch a large target package in nuclear war, because you don't know how many of your how many are going to get plucked out of the sky, and and so you lose your warheads to nothing if they get plucked out of the sky before they land. If you don't launch a large enough volume, then it's like all you did was provoke your enemy, it's just bad. And then you also open up those launch sites to conventional airstrikes. So it's not good. So that slow escalation part, it doesn't feel particularly studied. That's all. It's hard for me to believe. It would happen in a day. It would happen in a night. It would happen over the course of a week, maybe. Like a large salvo. And then, you need to explain this salvo that you launched against me. Like 5 cities just got destroyed, and there's, it's all this devastation. Like, we need to have a ceasefire now, and you're going to pay reparations, and this is your deadline, or I'm going to launch a reciprocal strike. And so, that's the story. And, frankly, there's people in America who are still voters and who can still, engage in direct action and all the stuff that they did in the Vietnam War. Where are they? Where are they? We don't want to get nuked today. Please end this stupid war where we're protecting Germany and Poland from themselves acting stupid. What? Is everybody high on speed, I guess? Maybe that's the explanation. All right. First, military targets are hit, including... Okay, so in the West, NATO deep nuclear strikes against communication hubs. Yeah, okay. Throughout October, the exchanges continue, escalating gradually. Fearful of a general strategic exchange, neither side targets the land-based ICBMs of the other, or launches so many warheads at once as to risk convincing the other side that an all-out attack is in progress. Neither side wishes to cross the threshold to nuclear oblivion in one bold step, and so they inch across it, never quite knowing if they have done so until after the fact. Okay, so this is what happens. Okay, like if you, all right, that's fine, and we'll just go with that for now. But like Russian cities are seeing at least MRBMs coming at them, and then like the local Russian commander, what's their rules of engagement? Like that's how these things work. Is that you have to like the guy in the bunker has to have rules of engagement based on his tactical knowledge, and yeah. That's what DEF CON is. It's rules of engagement. First, military targets are hit, including the first decapitating. So all this nuance, like about like, oh, we're going to attack, but only a little bit, and that stuff. It gets like as the exchanges start, it's very hard to maintain that level of nuance. Then industrial targets, clearly vital to the war effort, followed by economic targets of military importance. Okay. Yeah. So decapitating strikes at U.S. So there's. Evidently, things in the U.S. are being hit now. The major industrial and oil centers in neutral nations are targeted to prevent their possible use. So yeah, I get it. This is the target packages of what's being hit, but it's a strategic exchange at this point. It is still a strategic exchange. They're not going counter-force. They're not attacking each other's nuclear arsenals for whatever reason, which we'll talk. Probably because they're hoping to achieve a ceasefire. But this is strategic. So it should be a full strategic exchange now at this point, more or less. And you preserve some of your warheads for later, as a safeguard to preserve your sovereignty. Numerous warheads are aimed at logistical stockpiles and command and control centers in the armies in the field. The civilian political command structure is first decimated, then eliminated, almost by accident in some cases. The exchanges continue fitfully and irregularly through November, and then gradually peter out. Okay. Okay. So all right. So this is one paragraph of how the nuclear war went down, and who got hit, and how many people died in America, how many millions. What? Okay. And so then the war goes on for 2 more years. Yeah, and I will just highlight this strange detail right here. In North America, a flood of hungry refugees begins flooding across the Rio Grande. So this must be American refugees trying to get into Mexico, right? And most of the remaining military forces of the United States are deployed in the Southwest to deal with the mounting crisis. Okay, by giving refugee relief to the American refugees. They move at the orders of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, now the de facto government of the United States. Widespread food riots and violence in refugee areas are met with military force. The Mexican government protests. The Mexican government, I guess, doesn't want the U.S. military being mean to American citizens. And within months, Mexican armies units cross the Rio Grande to protect Mexican lives. Wait, what? So there's Mexican... What problems is Mexico having? Is Mexico having crop failures? Like, is there some reason that, like, Latin America, like, couldn't figure out some sort of food independence in the 2 years that the rest of the war has been puttering about, like hurtling towards doom? I mean, it seems like Latin America has been largely neutral and not engaged in this conflict. Why is there tons of starving Mexicans trying to pour into nuclear devastated America? This makes no sense. It makes no sense. Like, what? And that's the only like detail that I've gotten about what's going on in America. So yeah, this has got a lot of holes in it, and yeah, and then it goes on. America keeps trying to attack for some reason. I don't know why. It's like the Joint Chiefs of Staff are in charge of America and are apparently not. The military leadership is not seeking out whatever Russian leadership to achieve a ceasefire. See, the thing about this is the end of this is where the game begins. Is in the year 2000, the military chain of commands are breaking down and are becoming irrelevant. The civilian authorities are becoming irrelevant that legitimize the military authorities. So it's a little bit hard to believe in the sense that the big thing for me is that at some point, this Joint Chiefs, or that ends up being in charge of America, like says like, oh, we better stop fighting and save America. We better save America. Like this is dumb. Like, let's all arrange to shoot our the remaining stockpile of nuclear weapons into the ocean at these coordinates. And like this is my offer to the Russians. And the Russians come back with, well, I don't control that guy in that one city. And so everybody says, okay, well, all right, let's all nuke that guy. Or you have to get rid of that guy by tomorrow, and like in the meantime, we won't be shooting at you, or you need to sort out your problems. And so like a de-escalation at some point, even after the first initial strategic exchange should like is possible. And the command and control is the communications channels are there to allow for that. And, like a white flag still works. So, I think it's very interesting to think about this post-war Europe. And, it sounds like I've heard that Free League is going for like a less devastation, like a more limited exchange, which in my case, like it seems like more believable. So we could have a full, like America is nuked, like 20 plus cities, like a full target package. And, Chicago is, and so on. We could have that. And we could have, this, like there's lots of tactical nuclear craters all over Europe. But the part where the war drags on for this additional length of time, the part where the early tactical nuclear exchanges, especially in China, didn't happen. The part where China didn't attempt like a strategic existential strike, like we're going to cease to be China like tomorrow if we don't nuke Moscow. We're losing. This is our red button. And it's also like, why didn't they use that as a world appeal? So the geopolitics just it falters for me. So how long have I been talking about this? 2 hours? Oh my god. Okay.